Good evening. My name is Josias, and I've always been accustomed to the symphony of wildlife here in the Pantanal. The rustling of snakes slithering through the tall grass, the snorting of caimans along the river banks, and even the occasional trace of jaguars crossing my property. Life here has always been a haven of tranquility, or at least it seemed that way. I'm a simple man. I do what I can to care for my land. But what transpired that night changed everything. It was a night like any other. I was sitting on my porch savoring my terere while observing the starlit canopy. The aroma of damp earth mingled with the cool night breeze, until suddenly I began to hear something peculiar. A bellow, but not a common howl. It was something deep, cutting, almost as if it originated from a large and powerful beast, something that didn't belong in that place. The howls echoed from afar, from the dense woods, and soon I could sense in the air that the situation was unusual. In this region, it's rare for anything to disturb the peace of nature, and whatever was emitting those sounds seemed larger and more ferocious than anything I had ever heard before. I sat there, listening intently, trying to decipher what was unfolding. The strong wind made it difficult to pinpoint the source of the howling, but something in my gut told me it was heading my way. The noises drew nearer, becoming more intense, and suddenly everything plunged into a sepulchral silence. It was then that I heard heavy footsteps. My hand automatically reached for my shotgun, which I always keep near the door. Something was approaching, and my farmer's instinct, which had served me so many times in life, warned me it wasn't something ordinary. I grabbed the shotgun, cocked it, and quietly made my way to the tool shed from where I could observe without being seen. The sound of the footsteps on the earth grew clearer and clearer, but I still couldn't make out anything. Suddenly, I heard the sound of something running, something big. Then I saw it, a jaguar with wide, frantic eyes. It was trembling, running desperately towards the shed. It was visibly terrified, as if fleeing something. I couldn't recall ever seeing a jaguar in such a state before. They are confident hunters, but this one seemed completely beside itself. It burst into the tool shed and hid inside, quivering with fear. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew something very bad was about to. The howling was louder now. It was the sound of a wild creature that made the animals of the forest take cover, something much larger than the jaguar itself, something I would never have believed until that night. Suddenly, the jaguar's eyes widened even further. It stared out into the darkness as if escaping a demon. I sat there, paralyzed, not knowing what to do. The howling grew stronger and closer. Something was approaching. I looked into the undergrowth and saw the scene. An enormous figure that seemed to have stepped out of a nightmare. The creature had the appearance of a man, but with unearthly proportions. Its muscles were exaggerated, its skin dark and covered in fur, and its eyes glowed in the darkness. I was certain it was a werewolf, a beast I never imagined could exist. I was frozen and speechless, merely watching as it advanced towards the shed. The creature reached the tool shed where the jaguar was still concealed. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to shout. I wanted to run, but my shotgun seemed useless against such a monstrous being. The werewolf, with immense strength, pulled the jaguar from inside the shed with a single motion. It tried to fight back, but had no chance. The beast dragged it into the woods with terrifying brutality. I saw it all. The jaguar was being pulled away, its terrified cries mingling with the savage sounds of the werewolf. The scene was horrific, like a nightmare you can't wake up from. I couldn't move a muscle. The beast vanished into the darkness with the jaguar, and the sounds began to fade away. I sat there staring into the darkness, listening to the echoes of what had just transpired. Fear gripped me like never before. I was certain the jaguar was no more. This Pantanal had always been tranquil, just with its snakes and caimans, but after that night I was never the same, and few people believe my story. Good night. So before you settle in, take a moment to hit that like button on the video and subscribe to the channel. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is there, right now. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that gentle background hum, and let's drift together into tonight's journey. Good evening. My name is Nusiul. I am 76 years old, and I would like to recount what happened in Paraná in the year 1960. My wife and I resided in Bom Sucesso. In our neighborhood lived several acquaintances, but there was a peculiar fellow known as Zegoyaba. He always walked with his head down, hiding from everyone with dirty and tattered clothes. In our house lived my wife, my sister-in-law, and some relatives who came to visit the city. On an ordinary night, it was approximately 11 o'clock in the evening. We went to bed. That night felt very strange, and we had an unusual premonition. Bedtime arrived and everyone went to their rooms. My sister-in-law's bed was in front of one of the bedroom doors that led outside the house, and it was the same bed that, so to speak, blocked that door. Around midnight, we heard some suspicious noises coming from the room where my sister-in-law was sleeping. Curious, we went to see what was happening. We arrived there and were confronted by a large, hairy, black hand, pulling my sister-in-law's hair. However, it couldn't manage as the hair was very smooth and didn't get caught in those enormous claws. In my desperation, grabbed my shotgun and silently went to the door. I opened it quickly and pointed the shotgun at that thing that was outside, but it ran behind a truck that was parked there on the street. I went after it, and my wife stayed at home trying to calm everyone down, especially my sister-in-law. When I got to the spot, that thing was ready to attack, so I fired a shot, and suddenly the beast leaped and ran into the woods. I returned home, and we didn't sleep that night. The next day, the neighbors asked what all the commotion was the night before. We explained everything, and everyone was incredulous, but Zegoyaba had no reaction whatsoever. He was very strange, stranger than usual. He smelled bad and was very dirty. About 2 weeks later, he moved to another state, and we never saw that man again. And incredibly, that thing never appeared again, nor did we ever hear about it again. And I have believed to this day that that thing was that strange man who had the nickname Zegoyaba, and no one can change my mind. But to this day, no one really knows what that thing was. Good night. Hello, my name is Mauro. I currently reside in the city of Megalopolis, and what I am about to recount happened many years ago, when I was just 17 years old. Today I am 54, married, and have a son. Back then I didn't believe in the supernatural. All my friends did believe in such things. On a certain weekend, one of my friends invited me and another to go to his parents' farm to have a barbecue. Of course, I agreed instantly. We gathered our things and set off by car. We went there after lunch. It must have been 1 or 2 in the afternoon. When we arrived, we got out of the car and immediately started lighting the barbecue and having some beers. Time passed until night finally fell. At my friend's father's farm was also his grandfather. His grandfather also had a farm nearby, and for that reason his father had bought that farm, as it was practically next to his father's farm, where he had lived practically his whole life. As his grandfather was already a widower, he would spend the night there with my friend's parents. During the evening, while we were on the porch continuing to drink and grilling some meat, my friend's grandfather began to tell some stories that had happened to him when he was younger. I've never been one to believe in such things, but for some reason those stories he was telling were scaring me a little. We were there talking to him and questioning him about some things that had happened, and he said, "I know some of you here don't believe. I didn't either until I saw that creature. In these parts, many strange things happen, like sightings and shadows in the middle of the woods. Despite being a little scared, I still didn't believe, as my friend's grandfather was an old man, and everyone knows how old people like to invent and tell stories. Time continued to pass until it was around midnight, and we weren't going to sleep there. So we started to prepare to go home. We said goodbye and were almost getting into the car to hit the road, but before we left, my friend's grandfather said, "Don't take that road to leave the farm." There were 2 road options. Both would take us home, but one of them went through a dirt road near a cornfield, and it was the shortest way. And it was that road that his grandfather recommended we didn't take. And as everyone can imagine, we ended up not listening to his grandfather and took the shorter road. We were going along there peacefully, but when we reached the cornfield, the car stopped. At that moment, we didn't think that the car dying could have anything to do with something supernatural in that place. So we got out of the car and tried to figure out what was wrong with the engine. None of us were mechanics, but it didn't seem like anything was wrong, yet the car simply wouldn't start. Back then, it was common for practically all cars to have a flashlight to work on the car at night for this kind of situation. And we were there with the flashlight connected to the car battery, and suddenly we started to hear a flapping of wings. It was above us. The problem was that it wasn't the wings of a normal bird, a small bird. It seemed to be something quite large. That's when we heard something falling inside the cornfield. I, holding the flashlight, pointed it there to try to see what it was. That's when my friend, the son of the owner of the farm we were at, said, "Turn off that flashlight or whatever. There might attack us." I turned off the flashlight, and all of us, looking there even in the dark, could see a creature similar to a person. It had red eyes, its wings were raised, and that thing started staring at us. But for some unknown reason, it flew away from there. In desperation, we all got into the car and tried to start it. Seeming to be a miracle, the car started working. Again, we accelerated as fast as possible from there. After that night, I started to believe in such things, and I saw that not all old people invent stories. However, even today, I don't know what that was inside the cornfield. But with God's grace, I never saw that thing again, and I also never went back to that farm. Good night. Hello, my name is Jacinto. I will recount the facts and give my personal opinion, leaving it to each person to have their own interpretation in the way that is most convenient for them. Everything happened in the year 1968, when I was just 8 years old. At that time, my father owned a small farm in Amador Bueno, approximately 45 kilometers from the center of São Paulo. At that time, the entire region had many houses, predominantly very green woods, diverse trees, and vegetation typical of the region, as the deforestation that exists today had not yet begun. On my father's farm, there were 2 houses, one for the caretaker and his family, and the other for us to stay in when we spent the weekend there. Around there were other small farms, and very close by there was a corral where some horses were kept. On a certain weekend, we went there. Me, my father, my mother, my grandmother, my aunt, and her son, who logically was my cousin. His name was Vanderlei. Vanderlei and I like to listen to ghost stories and the supernatural in general, always being up to date on the characteristic legends of characters like the vampire, werewolves, etc. On that specific weekend, on Saturday, we spent the day playing on the farm, and when night came, we went to shower. After dinner, we stayed talking in the living room, which was in the front part of the house. The other people were in the kitchen, which was at the end of a hallway, on the other side of the house. It was more or less 10 o'clock at night when we began to hear a whistle coming from outside the house. It was a little distant. We paid attention and followed that whistle when suddenly the whistle got closer and closer to the house, and we joked with each other if it could be a sachi, something we didn't believe existed, as that legend seemed very fantastical. At a certain moment, the whistle got so close that it seemed to come from the other side of the front door of the living room. Whatever was out there was right on the porch. Vanderlei and I got goosebumps with that sound, despite it being a simple whistle, and very scared, we went to take a look out the window. It was very dark outside, and for that reason, we couldn't see anything. Then the whistle moved away while the horses that were in the corral became agitated, were neighing and running like crazy. After that, we heard some more noises as if something was running, jumping, and hitting wood. I told my father and my mother, and they didn't want us to go outside, saying that early in the morning they would see if anything wrong had happened, and then sometime later we went to sleep, but terrified by that strange event that had occurred. When dawn broke on Sunday, we immediately went to examine the surroundings to see if we could find anything out of the ordinary, and when we arrived at the corral, we could see that all the horses had their manes tied with tiny knots, and the same thing had happened with their tails. There wasn't a single horse that didn't have its manes and tails with knots. The legend of the Sachi says that he really likes to play with horses, and when he appears, he rides the horses and ties knots in their manes and tails. So I asked the skeptics and those who don't believe in anything, if it wasn't the Sachi, as incredible as it may seem, then what was that, and who or what would have tied all the tails and manes of the horses? I believe that no one would spend the whole night making tiny, precise knots in the hair of the horses, even more so in the dark, just for a simple prank, and with all the precision that the knots were made. I know it seems like a fantasy, but it really happened. Today, both Vanderlei and I are over 60 years old, and we still remember that story as if it were yesterday, and we affirm that it is true. To reinforce the veracity of this account, I did not omit names or even the place where the events occurred, leaving it very clear for anyone who wants to analyze it. Good night.